The push for rent assistance heats up as a deal on the second stimulus package looms. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Sunday afternoon. Hope you're good and safe. Thanks for joining me for Afternoons LALATE, our 2-hour programming block that starts every Sunday, actually every day, what am I saying, at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. Starts with a check, then goes to hazard pay 30 minutes after that, then FPUC, and ends with rent assistance. Big news overnight about rent assistance, and it's really quite interesting because I've been detailing to you the difference between an eviction moratorium and grant money. They're very different beasts. The president on Friday gave you really great news that he supports an eviction moratorium. He's going to ask for an eviction moratorium in a second stimulus package, and he aligns his positions with the Democrats on eviction moratorium. But on a state level, shocking news out of Texas today about a new rent program debuted that basically says we'll give you money, but we'll still allow you to be evicted. It shows you why eviction moratoriums on a federal level are needed. More about that in a second. Let me get right to the news. Overnight, massive negotiations continued between the parties that be on the second stimulus package. They are, on one side, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the head of the House of Representatives. And on the other side, Steve Mnuchin, who's Treasury Secretary to Donald Trump, and Mark Meadows, the latest chief of staff for the moment. The negotiations were fruitful, and a lot of things were agreed upon. Some remain unsettled. Chuck Schumer, who's the most pessimistic and negative of the group, gave those remarks Sunday mornings, shockingly, basically confirming our reporting from Friday that the deal is close, that a few things are still being ironed out, but a lot of things have been agreed upon. This was in CNBC, moreover, in another report today that said much of the package has been agreed upon, but some parts still remain unsettled. What parts have been agreed upon? Stimulus check. $1,200, everyone gets a stimulus check. Even the dependents get $1,200 stimulus check. What also seems to have been likely agreed upon was FPUC at $600 a week, despite what they're all chatting about on Sunday morning news. It's how many weeks of $600 a week. The president wants a short-term offer of $600 a week. Nancy and Chuck wanted to January 2021. So it's close. Perhaps the duration of the $600 a week is not being agreed upon. But it seems like it's further along than that. And again, we were the first to report that last Friday. Hazard pay seems to be likely in the mix, seems to be still positive. That was our third video this afternoon. And finally, rent assistance, which it's one of those bills that you think, how can you not have in a stimulus package? And it was in the first stimulus package. But then there's that idiot from Kentucky who doesn't understand what evictions are. Yeah, when the Mitch McConnell HEALS Act bill, which is how I should really refer to it, because he wrote it, it was not supported by the president, we now know. The president didn't write it. When it was introduced to the Senate, it had no eviction moratorium in there. And it came 24 hours after the president's two leading economic people, Mnuchin and Meadows, M&M, said, hey, there's going to be an eviction moratorium in the Republican bill tomorrow morning, and it's going to protect Americans. That was before they went to that's before they went to Mitch's computer, which apparently doesn't allow anyone else to look at what's being printed. So Mitch printed it out, introduced it to the Senate, and sure enough, it wasn't in there. Needless to say, what do you think the White House thought? Well, by Wednesday and Thursday, the president had to, cover his feet, cover his tracks, and basically stay on message, which is, I'm giving you an eviction moratorium. How about the HEALS Act? I'm giving you an eviction moratorium. Basically avoiding the subject of the HEALS Act. That was great news because we really didn't know what was going on. By Friday, I explained to you, hey, what's happening is that the president wants to give it to you. The Democrats want to give it to you. It's just that idiot from Kentucky, he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, doesn't want to give it to you. And really no one's supporting him at this point. Now, a new report out today suggests that eviction moratoriums are needed even more so because states aren't still likely to extend their inherent state moratoriums. What do I mean? 50% of states don't have eviction moratoriums, other 50% do. Of those 50% that do, some of them are expiring. And so when presented the opportunity to extend them, either on a state level or a local level, some state politicians don't want to do it. They are saying, I'll leave it up for the president and the Congress to do it. We're not going to do it on a state level, causing the urgency of it to be done in a stimulus package even more important. It comes out of Texas. El Pueblo Primero, who's a workers' rights group, says that the current proposal just today out of Texas to give you grant money but to allow you to be evicted doesn't make sense. Unless the grace period is city mandated, it's going to be toothless. The way things are going now, landlords are trying to squeeze out all the rent they can from tenants. So people are being forced to work in unhealthy conditions, are forced to move in with others they cannot afford rent. Houston's Mayor Sylvester Turner announced a $15 million rent assistance program Friday, but he said he's not giving you an eviction moratorium. Our objective is to help the most vulnerable. Our priority is to ensure quick access to families and avoid evictions, working alongside with landlords. But Turner was under fire. You know why? Because his program was, hey, we'll give you some money, and you give that money to your landlord. Well, the landlord will say, hey, you're behind rent for 3 months because you haven't been able to pay during the pandemic. I'm still evicting you. Thank you for the money. I'm still evicting you. And so all these political groups came out and social groups, whether it's in San Antonio or Texas or Houston, said, hey, people are being evicted. Why are you giving them grant money and not giving them eviction protection? Because all they're doing is turning that grant money over to the landlords who are then evicting them. I will fully admit, I'm not going to go into detail this because it's sort of beyond the scope of this channel, but there's a lot of stories in the comments of people who say that not only they're having problems making rent, but the landlords are trying to raise the rent. The situation with eviction moratoriums is even more serious as the number of cases explode overnight. The number of new cases of evictions across the country is somewhere between 20 to 40 million new cases pending, a number we have not seen since the Great Depression. Eviction moratorium programs on a federal level under the HEROES Act are so important from many regards, and this is what I want to touch on. If passed by law, the second stimulus package, an eviction moratorium would in essence stop that minute any eviction that's currently pending or being processed. Namely, if you can't make rent this very minute and an eviction moratorium becomes law, you cannot be evicted. If you're currently in an eviction proceeding, that eviction proceeding would have to stop. That's why the nature of an eviction proceeding, moratorium, is so important. The U.S. has certainly gotten a lot of attention because of this. The U.S. is currently the only major world country that does not have an eviction moratorium in place for its citizens. Countries across the world, as another plane tries to interrupt me, was one before that as well, have seen that they needed to pass eviction moratoriums. And so countries across the world passed eviction protection so that their citizens during the pandemic could not be thrown out of their homes. The U.S. hasn't done that yet. In the first stimulus package, they passed an eviction moratorium. It was effective. It prevented any eviction in any state of any county or any city across this United States for an eviction to be filed. Ultimately, if you couldn't pay rent, the landlord couldn't throw you on the street. The landlord couldn't start a proceeding against you. The landlord couldn't sue you. The landlord couldn't demand a rent increase, couldn't try to ruin your credit score. And the help expanded more than just rent. It also expanded to people who own homes or apartment buildings. If you have a mortgage on your home and couldn't make the mortgage, the lender, the bank, could not foreclose. Same thing for an apartment building. If you own an apartment building, you don't have income from their tenants, the bank could not foreclose. Ultimately, when we talk about rent help, like grant money, we're talking in Texas with Turner, or we're talking about evictions on a national level, it's the evictions that have to be done right now, because evictions keep you in your home. Rent money doesn't keep you in your home, because ultimately the landlord can still try to evict you. That's why the second stimulus package is so comprehensive for the HEROES Act per se, because it first does what the president, Nancy, Chuck, and the Democrats all want to do, which is say, stop evictions. We stopped them before in the first stimulus package. We're going to stop them again. Second, it says we're also going to protect people who have mortgages, so stop mortgage foreclosures. And then it figures out how to deal with the rent situation, because going forward, we can't not have any rent exchanged anywhere in this country during this pandemic. That won't work because everything would just pile up. So it proposes rent assistance, which is what's happening in Texas right now, which is basically says, hey, if you cannot make rent because of the pandemic and you're below an income level, you can apply and get grant money. And that grant money will come directly to your landlord from the federal government and also to your utilities, water, electric, gas, things like that, from the federal government. It's great news. It's exactly what this country needs. Ultimately, a lot of the viewers of this channel have lost their homes, have been evicted or facing eviction. And evictions is the most critical, fundamental issue of the financial cliff after unemployment. Because if you can't stay in your home, what are you going to do? As a one person said in Texas, it's resulting in people moving into unsafe environments, crowded homes with several families in one home, under one roof in too close a confined space where COVID-19 cases are expanding. If you don't know, here in Los Angeles, the vast majority of new COVID-19 cases are happening in places exactly like that, where people couldn't make rent and are now living in very confined spaces with a lot of families right on top of each other. And so when one person gets COVID-19, everyone in this small little house of a lot of families gets COVID-19 right away. And it gets very serious very quickly. Ultimately, after a lot of bad data there I had to go through, there's great news. The stimulus package is likely to get approved this coming week. The president wants to give you an eviction moratorium. The Democrats want to give you an eviction moratorium. Sometimes we have to hear the bad stuff to get through to the good stuff. And that's sort of the spirit of this channel. I'm never going to not tell you bad economic data. I'm never going to not tell you unemployment, jobless claims, or things like that. I'm not going to just sit back and say everything's wonderful, because one person has been doing that, and that hasn't worked. It's called Mitch McConnell. As we come into Monday morning, I want you to stay positive, focused, and motivated. Coming up later is Evenings on LALATE. 2 big videos. I'll be updating you on the check. First at 6:45 Pacific Standard Time, followed by EIDL. Stay motivated, stay positive, and stay focused, and stay of LA for more.